Welcome to the Webflow podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for flying all the
Yeah,
way to San Francisco.
it is. It is wild to be here and doing this in person because it was literally like I was sat opposite this guy Hamish in the co-working space, and he was like, "We should definitely do this in person. If he's going to do it, why don't you go? It'll be so much better." And shout out to Hamish Duncan because there was no way I would have been like, "Hey, if I come to San Francisco, can we do this in person?" Like without him just saying that. So I'm psyched to finally be here. Before we get into your failures, I've actually bought a little gift from London.
Ooh, keeping me.
I've got some tea.
Ooh, I love tea.
And I've actually got some marmalade. I don't know why. I was like on this Paddington Bear hype. So I was
By the way, I
like,
was there last summer,
oh,
and I
nice.
took a bunch of pictures with the Paddington Bear
Oh,
with
cool.
my daughters. So this is awesome.
Well, I was thinking like the tea, obviously you can get tea anywhere. And I saw it in the
Mind if I
kitchen
open it?
downstairs. Yeah, go for it. In the kitchen downstairs, you've got loads of tea and stuff. But I was like, this is just kind of a fun little kind of memento.
I love it. Marmalade.
See,
This is like growing up. Marmalade
Yeah.
was such a delicacy.
oh, right.
Where probably had it once every couple of years that my uncle would bring from a different city. I mean, we had like different types of like homemade jams and stuff, but marmalade was definitely.
A special
I remember
thing.
I remember the word. It sounds the same in Russian, delicatessen.
Oh, right.
That my uncle would say. I'm like, okay, that sounds really fancy, and he would kind of bucket it in that category. So this is awesome. This is very special.
Okay, so a little.
And it reminds me of my family, like my last family trip, where I think we went on all of these lines, or most of them.
Nice.
So
Throwback.
all right, what do I do with these?
You can just put them on the table or the floor or whatever. That's totally fine. I just felt like it's nice to give someone a gift before you ask them a load of difficult questions about their failures.
So you're buttering me
I'm trying
up
to soften
or
you up.
marmalading me up to preserve whatever good vibes we have.
Oh, see, I was waiting for the dad banter, but I'm
Let's see, are
glad.
there any on here? This is gonna be a jubilee of puns.
Oh God. Okay. Well, that's the end of the interview,
Or-
guys. Thanks a
yeah,
lot for
okay.
coming.
All right, we'll circle up on that. Anyway.
Oh God, yeah. I feel like this is going to be the whole day now. Just go into different...
No, I think I'll end the train of puns there.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. So, Vlad, tell me about your relationship with failure.
I've never failed. Don't know what that is. Just kidding. Oh man, my relationship with failure. I think I'm definitely a person that's been accustomed to failing, then assuming that was the end, and then seeing end of a thing, and then seeing later how I was completely wrong. That what I thought was a failure was actually just a learning moment and just a stepping stone to something bigger. And I mean, Webflow itself failed 3 times, like literally technically, and there's so many other ones that so many other little and big failures in kind of that journey where I think I've always like catastrophized whenever something like happens. I always think, all right, this is kind of the end of this idea, or this is not going to work. But over the last 15 years especially, have retrained that psychological story in my head that failure is not the end all and be all. I also don't like glorifying it. A lot of people put kind of the spin around you can only do great things or make progress in life by failing. And a lot of failures, truly, you can get to a place where it teaches you a lot, right? But it's freaking painful. So I don't think of it as like I'm not chasing failure or something that I'm just try to encourage other people just to learn by failing. So I think I have a complicated relationship with the word and the idea, but I've certainly failed at least my fair share, if not a lot more, and have seen over and over that I have given those moments a lot more weight than they deserve in the moment, and with time have figured out that I could have bounced back much sooner and it wasn't as bad as I imagined in the moment.
It's fascinating that you say that you've had your fair share of failure and that you don't like glorify it, because the genesis story of Webflow, I mean, that you failed 3 times and the 4th attempt was the one. And every interview I've watched, with you talking about that whole process of trying to get Webflow going, and then life happens and you had a kid and didn't get investment and YC, and like there was this whole backstory to it that you don't actually love how failure works, and necessarily like you don't want it to be like something that you glorify, even though that's kind of a huge part of your identity as CEO of Webflow.
Yeah, it feels like I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way, that failure is an identity. I think I've more identified with the idea of trying again.
Perseverance.
Yeah, just continuing to keep at it until something works. Yes, failure in many moments felt like, I was really in a headspace where, it doesn't make sense to keep trying. But I don't know, those are the moments that I don't want to glorify, right? Where I wish I had a lot more perspective at the time that, because I went into some pretty dark, deep kind of mental health worries and so many things where I didn't think well of myself as a person, as a leader or as a founder or as a dad or a husband, all those things. And I don't know in retrospect if any of those things were like really super helpful to be in the like I wasn't able to manage those emotions that well, especially in the early days. But I think over time, as I saw more and more of these reps of, hey, this is actually not the end of the world, when it felt like a failure, just a few weeks or a few months ago, kept kind of rewiring the story in my head that maybe this internal assumption that failure is like the end all be all is not accurate. And I think I've had enough of those repetitive stories that, just the one thing you learn is that I think it was Robert Frost. I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's one of my favorites. I remember the feeling of reading the quote. I don't remember the actual quote, but I think he said something to the effect of, one thing I learned about life through my many, many years of living, I think it was like towards the end of his life, can be summed up in three words: it goes on. Like life goes on. So I've really tried to take on that perspective no matter what's happening. Like I've always figured out a way to move forward. And even when I experience failure now, or what feels like failure, it's encouraging to go back to those three words to know that it's not always going to be this way.
But why did you keep going? I mean, it's such a fascinating story in my head that, you had these multiple failures and these multiple investors saying, no, like this idea is not mature enough or whatever. And you were just like, no, I'm doing it. And I think sometimes there gets to a point where, maybe you're like, you know what, maybe the smartest thing to do would be to completely abandon this idea and not carry on. But you were like,
Well,
no, I'm going to go for it. And I'm just
actually,
intrigued why that happened.
that's a romanticized version. I actually did get into a place where I did say, this doesn't make sense to go on. I did experience those thoughts and actually those decisions and those actions. So for example, especially the most recent kind of technical failure of Webflow as a corporation. This is 2008 so a few things happened. One is we raised some funding. I had two other co-founders. I was still working at Intuit at the time, but we were like seriously pursuing starting Webflow again. And a few things happened. We got like a trademark, not a lawsuit, but a threat of a lawsuit. Like somebody said, you can't use the word Webflow to build software for like the specific class of trademark. And then Weebly, which we considered to be a competitor at the time. In 2007, I believe they got into YC and raised a seed round, but in 2008, when we were trying to start Webflow, they raised, I think, like a $20 million Sequoia seed round, which was at the time massive, right? And I had put those things together with like, oh, we can't use the name, we're out of money. I think I'm trying to remember. No, I didn't. We didn't know that my wife was pregnant yet, so weren't thinking about that yet. My co-founders are kind of like starting to get demotivated, and we couldn't use the name. I really thought that, when we had like wound everything down, that it had failed, and I was like, this is not worth the kind of pursuit anymore. We lost. They're like, this company is gonna keep building something amazing. This other company, by that I mean Weebly, which I consider to be a competitor. I just thought it was over. Like I literally thought it was over, and for the next couple of years, I only did so I was still able to use the name Webflow for freelancing. So I was doing some freelancing work on the side, more just for like extra income. But for all intents and purposes, I had considered that the idea for the product Webflow to be dead. And it was honestly a combination of many different things that like re-inspired me to do it again. But I wasn't in this headspace of like, no matter what, in like 2008, especially like through 2010-ish, I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to make this happen again. I was having some thoughts around like, oh, I'm going to have some regrets that I, didn't see it through. And the other thing that I got really, and this was a a mistake at the time, or I consider a mistake now. We would have had to use a different name, and that was because we could have raised more money, or we could have like stretched the time longer, kind of kept moonlighting and kept building the product. But we had to adopt a different name. I think I shared this publicly before. It was going to be Marked Up, MARKDUP, because you couldn't get that was the only domain that we could get after HTML markup. And I really hated the name. And I was like so attached to Webflow that the name was more important to me than the product, which was probably stupid in retrospect, because if we had started building the product that Webflow ended up becoming back then, which I already had the idea for, and it would have been pretty different than Weebly. I just like had assumed too much that they were going to get into the space, no matter like they were growing so fast that they're going to become more professional and target web designers, etc. But for all intents and purposes, I just remember fully giving up and considering, like, I didn't think that I was going to come back to it. And I was like investing into my day job and into it. And that's when I, started having kids. And I really wasn't thinking about this sort of like how you kind of quoted, like this determination, like, no, I'm not going to give up. It actually took some other events happening that re-inspired me to start again.
Okay, that's really interesting, because maybe I've, looked into this as like a story of
Yeah.
like one man versus the world
Yeah,
type
yeah.
thing, and actually you're just like,
One
no, like
man. Yeah.
life events, happened, and there's so much nuance in someone's story, and it's very easy to look back at all these data points and be
Yeah.
like, well, I overcame this one, and then that
There's
led
so
to
much like with these stories, there's so much, and I have to acknowledge with my own too, there's so much survivorship bias. Like, oh, this worked for me, therefore this is life advice to overcome adversity or to build something. Or
Yeah.
but there's probably more stories where people did the exact same thing or something very similar, or the timing wasn't right and it just outright didn't work.
And there's so much luck as well, it seems, in terms of,
Absolutely.
meeting the right person that unlocks something and
Let me tell you
investors.
about luck. I only, I already mentioned, like, I've completely given up. And I wasn't thinking of it as like, oh, my life is a failure at that point. Like, a couple of years had passed. I was like really enjoying my day job at Intuit. I was doing some amazing things there. My kids were young. I was really enjoying those moments. I mean, I'm still enjoying every moment with my kids. But I wasn't thinking of it as like, oh, I gave up. I mean, I knew I made a rational decision at the time that it wasn't worth pursuing what felt like a rational decision. So I wasn't like wallowing in this kind of like my life isn't complete or I'm going to regret not doing this or whatever. And then like a few things happened. So in 2008, when we were going through this like trademark issue, we had applied for a trademark with the US PTO, I forget, the Patent and Trademark Office. So you go through this online application. Can't talk today. By the way, we just got back from our company retreat in Canada last week, and I'm like getting back from losing my voice because I had so many great conversations, and it's like our one time a year that we all get together. So forgive me for that. Okay, where was I?
Patent
Oh
office.
yeah. So we did this like patent office application, which is how the other company found out that we exist. Because whenever you file, there's sort of like a objection process where anybody with that trademark gets notified, and they told us like, hey, you can't actually use this because we own the trademark for web-based software or whatever. And then had totally forgotten about that. And then in 2011, I already moved a couple times, but my second daughter was already born. She was very, very young. I think she was only a few months old. She would have been 6 months old. We received kind of one of these certified mail envelopes to our house in Sacramento. And I open it up and it has like a certificate for Webflow, the trademark for Class 42, which is web-based software. So apparently, like, talk about luck. It's like something happened. I don't know exactly what happened, but somehow, even though we got a rejection letter in 2008, something happened where either that company let it lapse or they forgot about it and they no longer had a product named that. It was a company called learn.com. I think they wanted to make a web-based learning product, right? But that was through a website or some sort of web portal. So I have no idea what happened, but it's like pure luck that somehow that trademark ended up, even though it was rejected, they had some sort of system that it was in a queue. And do the math, 3.5 years later, 4 years later, was somehow assigned to me. And at that point, the company that was established in 2008, I think it was like Webflow LLC, was no longer around. So I had to like reincorporate it, to like go through this whole process to like basically have the trademark owned by a legal entity, which I could barely afford at the time. It was like, I think you had to pay like $800 to California to get the LLC back with some back pay to show that you would have owned that kind of that name through that entire period since we applied. But that was like, to me, some sort of, whether you call that divine or supernatural or, just serendipity, but all under the broad category of luck, that a sign that like, hey, maybe this is a thing that you should keep pursuing. But even that didn't kick me into, I kept working at my job. I kind of started to think more about Webflow, like, could it happen? There were some changes that into it that made me think about maybe there's something next on the horizon. I was considering joining another startup, not starting Webflow, actually with my coworker at the time, Bryant, who ended up being my co-founder here. So that's a long story, but it was a totally different startup. And then also by sheer luck, at some point in early 2012, this like March 2012, I still at my job, still super happy there. This trademark thing happened like November the year before. So it was kind of that inspiration had worn off. I saw this video called, I think I mentioned it a couple times publicly, Inventing on Principle, but it was randomly shared. I didn't go on Facebook much, but it was like, I believe it was on Facebook, but I just remember like a friend who doesn't share much just shared this video because, he really enjoyed the talk. And that, like seeing that video right in that moment was like the spark that brought all that inspiration back. Because a year before that, I think responsive design started becoming a thing, like CSS, media queries, etc. There were a couple of products that Adobe had launched, which I was sort of like seeing in the background and thinking, yeah, this is like an interesting space. Like now that Adobe is in this space, like, it's clear that there's validation for it and they're probably going to eat everyone's lunch because they have won pretty much every single like creative design tool that has massive kind of broad designer appeal, etc. So in my mind, it was kind of a, this is a done deal. Like others are like chasing this idea now. But seeing that video was like exactly the thing I needed to be like, no, dude, what you have in your head is actually pretty special. And every attempt in the past like led up to this moment, and now the technology is really ready. I think Chrome just hit like 1.0, where all of these APIs were now available for like CSS manipulation, et cetera, where you can actually build something like Webflow in the browser. So those two things, a few months apart, I was already in this headspace of like, I'm not going to go back to this. But once I saw that video, that's when like all of that inspiration came rushing back. I'm like, no, I got to give this one more shot. So, is that credit to me for being like super determined? Probably not. It's maybe a little bit of credit to me for like listening to that inspiration, and a huge amount of credit to my wife for taking, with two very young kids, listening to me and saying like, I just saw this video and believe me, it's not going to fail like the last three times. Oh, and by the way, we were like in the process of buying our first house in Sacramento at the time. We had to like cancel that, and we have to move to the Bay Area because I want to apply to, Y Combinator or whatever. So all that felt like, in hindsight, just pure luck that those things happened when they did. Yeah. I'll stop talking now.
No, that's an epic story. I mean, like, I definitely think that there's a combination of like seizing the moment, being inspired at the right time. I guess it's like a combination of nature and nurture almost.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
you inherently wanted to do this idea for years. You'd tried, got a little bit further, life happens, co-founders leave, whatever, all sorts of different things happened along that journey. But then there's like, the serendipitous moments, I guess, where you see a video or something
Yeah.
at the
It's
right
almost like
time.
the universe was conspiring to make sure I started again.
I feel like the universe just gives you a little nudge, just kind of kicks you in the right direction with stuff that just doesn't make sense. But you look back and you're like, that was weird. Like, why on earth was I shown that at that exact moment? I think.
I think that is universally true.
You see, the dad banter is going to continue for the whole interview. Okay, let's dive into the failures now. Tell me about failure number one, not valuing yourself when you went back to freelancing.
This one is a little bit not Webflow, the product related. So this is when I went back to just working on websites on the side. The name was still Webflow. It's just like Webflow as a DBA for my sole proprietorship. But this moment is, and I built so many websites. I built probably like 10 to 15 websites using Dreamweaver and some combination of like WordPress and Joomla at the time. But I was really, every single conversation with a client, I think I was on the defensive around like, I don't know if I'd come like my previous job before that was working at this place called the Russian Yellow Pages, which is kind of like under. I was still, not really experienced and didn't know how to negotiate. I think I got paid like a few $100s a week or a month actually there because I was like, in retrospect, I think I was like taken advantage of, to be honest, where I was like designing business cards and like yellow page ads and like wedding invitations and like these custom calendars or whatever, a lot of graphic design. But I had come to see my work as something that was like more like hourly, if not less. And I didn't see others seeing a lot of value in it. So when I started doing web design work for like actual clients, I think I'd internalized that where I just felt really bad about. I enjoy the process of like working with clients to understand, their business, and these are all like super basic websites, right? Like usually not more than like 10 pages, kind of what you would expect from like dentist websites or like grocery stores, whatever. And I had been charged, like I've been like slowly working up towards charging like $400, $500, and that's for like weeks and weeks of designing the site, building it, like writing the code to build it, setting up a CMS, etc. And then I really struggled with getting people to, if there was a hosting component, I would try to find like the cheapest version and then like charge the customer at cost because I felt bad about like adding anything about my services or my work on top of that, anything like a retainer. And then I had this amazing client. I actually just was texting with him the other day after like a 5-year hiatus, just kind of randomly, who I had like, I think I it was a place called Ocean View Dental here in San Francisco, and I had spent like a bunch of time building the site, and I was really proud of it. And I was like presenting I did a whole like demo of like this is how everything works. They gave me a bunch of feedback. I fixed a bunch of things, and then I was in a conversation like giving the invoice to the client who actually he owns like multiple dental offices, but he was in Citrus Heights, which is Sacramento. So I was like giving them this invoice, and I'm like, this is the highest invoice I've ever put down on paper. It was like $750. And I think he had seen how hard I was working or how many like meetings we've had, or maybe he just like however much he paid for his previous site. He said like, no, I'm not going to pay that. And I got like kind of no, I'm not going to, he said, it was all in Russian, but he said something like, I'm not going to pay you that much. And I got like kind of heart palpitations like, oh, I went too high. I went overboard. I shouldn't have, there's a reason why I was nervous. And then he kind of paused a bit, probably for effect. He's like, I think it's worth a lot more. And he's like, I'm going to pay you $5,000. And I was shocked. Like, I was completely shocked. Right. And that ultimately, turned my entire perspective around. I still didn't charge that much for like clients going forward, but I charge a lot more than I did before. So I started like escalating, my rates to like $2,000 per like an equivalent site build, because a lot of these things have like a CMS and like a custom design, etc. It took a lot of time. But that one conversation, I was like, it took like this incredible client valuing my work more than I was valuing it to kick me into a more, I don't know, self-valuing mode where I was like, huh, maybe this is way more valuable than I was giving it credit for.
I'm sure a lot of freelancers kind of resonate with that idea of like there's this kind of people pleaser aspect to a lot of people in the Webflow space where they're doing creative work and they're getting paid for it and they're like, oh my god, I get to do what I enjoy and I get paid for it. But what I wonder is how has that, I'm not sure if you'd consider yourself a people pleaser, and I'm not saying you do, but do you feel like that experience really shaped how you have thought about being a CEO at Webflow and how that's like developed? Because it must be difficult to have like a caring, empathetic nature, but also having to make really tough decisions as a leader.
I'm probably the CEO of people pleasing when I started. That's definitely my kind of core nature, right? I didn't want to. There's this, I forget exactly what it's called, Enneagram, I think, like this personality test that you do. And I was labeled as a peacemaker, which is essentially like you just want peace. You don't want people to be upset. You don't want to let people down, etc. So I absolutely had a lot of that in the early years of Webflow, and even through like the mid years, where that just like I started to see that this kind of I almost had a toxic view of kindness where it's not quite it's more like politeness, right? I wanted to be like seen as the good guy and not delivering bad news or saying I'm, work could be better or I'm disappointed in a certain result, etc. And what that led to is actually overall, like it took me a while to realize this, that kind of faux kindness, that politeness or that like sort of desire to avoid conflict was actually one of the most unkind things you could do to an individual and a team. So what I realized was, let's say you have somebody who's like really struggling as part of a team to pull their weight or to like do the things that the team expects them to do, right? And if I would like avoid a hard conversation with them or try to like work around where you're kind of like assigning work to others. And that ultimately took me too long to see that you're actually hurting the rest of the team because the team is kind of like sees that the other person is not like it starts to create this kind of weird dynamic within the team where other people are having to make up for what another person might be really struggling with. And you might have, in the worst case, some of your best performers start to like check out or leave because they're seeing that somebody that is like not pulling their weight is being tolerated with, right? So that's one. But then I realized that it's actually one of the most unkind things you can do to that person is to try to like shield them from criticism or from higher expectations because they're not learning anything, right? Or they're not getting the kind of feedback that they need to know where they need to improve. And ultimately that hurts everyone. So like the net result is you're actually being less kind to everyone, to the entire team. You get like worse results. You're being less kind to customers because people, if a team is responsible for delivering something amazing into the hands of customers, it solves their problems. It's usually going to take longer. It's not going to be as good. So that realization that you're actually, I was optimizing by trying to like in the short term avoid some short term pain, for both myself to have a hard conversation or another person to like hear some hard truths. Even like I had trouble doing that even in a caring way. Like I would always do it in a caring way, but I had trouble convincing myself that this person will think that I don't care about them if I, share some, more constructive feedback, etc. So that was definitely probably the biggest kind of leadership learning journey, understanding how I can actually maximize for net kindness across the board and not avoid this kind of what feels sometimes in the moment as like unkindness, but it's actually, if you look at it from a different perspective, it's actually the kindest thing you can do for a person in a team, to be more direct about what could be better, etc. But it's still something honestly, it's like so ingrained in me. It's something that I continuously have to keep working on, even over the last, many years as the company has scaled, etc.
I think the best leaders that I've worked under have been really good people. um people, they've got that kindness, empathy, sympathy. They can get inside someone else's shoes and kind of see the world from their perspective, but they also at the same time have the ability to have those tough conversations and deliver that information honestly without being like overly critical. And I think sometimes there's like, you're either a nice guy or you're not a nice guy. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the best leaders actually have both
Yep.
the kind of critical mindset to see a problem and deal with it, like honestly and directly, but also be a kind person. So I think,
Yeah, what I've taken on is more of like sports team coach mentality, right? Great coaches, they care about their team, right? Even when they're like saying something really sucks, right? Or like this play sucks. This could be a lot better. Like that team with great coaches knows that the coach really cares for them, right? And really cares about the team winning. And, those are some of if you look at it from the outside, some of these like team, like the way that coaches like really coach their team, sometimes it looks really aggressive. But for that team, I don't think I've ever been like, when coaches like yell in people's faces. I've never been that kind of person. But like the best coaches, I think, are able to mix this. It's not like pick which side of the pendulum you're on. It's more, how do you get like human care and connection and high performance in the same kind of like bucket. And this analogy of like a sports team that wins together really resonates with me because that's where, you're trying to be the best in the world at something or in a specific area at something. And it really takes like a mindset for every player on the field to be ready for, like, everyone has this growth mindset where like there's always things to improve, and I'm open to feedback and I expect feedback, and whoever the leader, the coach, or the team captain is, like, feels that responsibility to not shy away from when they see something that could be better, to lean into that. But the most important thing is to like foster that sense of like, hey, this is one team. Like, we play together, we win together, we care about each other, we have each other's backs. But that also means like we hold each other to a higher bar, because if one of us starts to kind of like slack off, then we all risk the chance of losing, because like the way that these teams are formed requires each person to be at the top of their game to truly win.
I could talk to you about this for hours, but we need to crack on.
By the way, I love that term, crack on. I only hear it from folks in the UK, but I think of eggs for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know what the crack on, where it even comes from. But the other phrase that I got told to say to you is squeaky bum time. What are your squeaky bum time moments?
Squeaky bum time?
You know when
what is that?
You know when you clench your buttocks, in a moment where you're like, this could be a car crash, you might squeaky bum time. Speaking of squeaky bum time moments, tell me about failure number 2, getting too caught up in the no-code hype and trying to do too much.
Yeah, this one's still a little
Raw.
too soonish, little raw in some minds, my mind included. But I think we, especially in like the pandemic years, went a little too broad into things like logic, where so I saw so much potential for like everything to be no code and all integrated and everything kind of under one umbrella, that kind of lost the forest from the trees, whatever that expression is. Although my new favorite expression is squeaky bum time. I need to work that into my repertoire. And I think we way over indexed in that direction before getting some of the core fundamentals really right, which is why we're swinging back and like really investing into our CMS, core design tools, performance, components, variables, etc. Our ecosystem of APIs to help other people build a lot more things around the Webflow platform. So I think that was a diversion that probably took us back quite a bit, or took our eyes off the main ball or the main prize for a little while, but I'm glad we're getting back. And I think that was we drank a little bit of our own Kool-Aid. I drank a little bit of my own Kool-Aid, right? With like NoCode Conf, and before it went into Webflow Conf, where I really did see everything being under one umbrella, but it was something that we should not have tried to specialize in before really getting the core parts of building a really, really powerful website off the ground. So, I mean, it's just another learning, right? You live and learn, but that's one area where I think could have done things differently sooner.
It's difficult though with a product roadmap like Webflows, I'd imagine, because there's so many different user groups that I am struggling to understand like what the core user group is with Webflow, because you've got freelancers who are designers and developers, and then you've got marketers who also seem to freelance with the tool. And then you've got small agencies, large agencies who are actually building for, companies to actually manage the websites. How are you now thinking about, I mean, Webflow's mission has always stayed the same. Like, you're empowering people to build for the web. But what I'm kind of intrigued about is how you now decide the product roadmap. And a lot of people on Twitter have asked me to ask you, like, what's Webflow's vision?
What's Twitter? Just kidding.
X.
I'm kidding. We're going to call it Twitter for now.
I just feel weird about calling it X.
Yeah.
But anyway.
As you should.
As I should. Can you just break down how you decide what the product roadmap is? Because you said you made a mistake with looking at logic and stuff, but how do you even
There's
know?
So many, there's not like a neat answer to that, because that's one of the hardest parts about, I think, any software business.
Yeah.
But especially about something as broad as Webflow. Today, we think about it more as there's this awesome flywheel between end businesses, which is ultimately who websites are built for, right? The vast majority of the time. Yeah, you have, agencies building their own sites or portfolios, etc. But the vast majority of like the website market is building sites either a business building for themselves or agencies or freelancers building for clients, which is that same business. And it's really important for us to support, because so many businesses, large and small, more on the like the medium size and up, typically work with a partner or a service provider or an agency or a freelancer. So it's important that the capabilities that you need to build a website, the collaboration you need around it, both on a team level and coordinating with an external agency, all that is, there's a lot of overlap for what an agency and a business might need to build their site, right? So like 90+% of the capabilities of the platform like fall under both umbrellas, right? Like an agency needs the same capabilities as an end business. Of course, with size, both agency size and business size, you have more people involved, more functions, more different departments, more collaboration needs, more approval needs, more, sites tend to have like more traffic, more complexity, more iteration, more experimentation, etc. So there's like various degrees of needs at different stage of business, but broadly, as long as you're in this kind of professional bucket of like really professional grade mission critical websites that aren't just a cookie cutter, take a template and change some text, it's largely similar functionality, right, that people need across CMS, designing kind of a front end experience, animations, collaboration, etc. So we try to look at both agencies and freelancers, kind of this larger partners bucket, as an enabler to businesses, right? So everything that businesses need, agencies need as well, plus more. Like they need some more client management tools, etc. But largely, the agencies act like a partner motion because they're the ones working with clients to help them understand Webflow, help them implement Webflow, help them transition from a different platform, help them build a new website from scratch, help them continue improving their site, improve their kind of conversion rate, or optimize their site so that it performs better over time, build new landing pages, run new marketing campaigns, new ads, etc. So like that entire bucket, the core platform is the same to all people. So even when we start to get into things that a lot of our customers are asking for, like, hey, we've built our site, we're now managing content, now we need the site to actually perform better, both in terms of like raw performance, how quickly it loads, but also in how people are converting, how copy is performing, how how users are actually signing up and becoming, going from visitors to users to paying users. All of that starts to become important, not only for those end businesses, because they now have like marketing teams responsible or growth teams responsible for driving that business success, or like making sure they're the top of their funnel is like really healthy. But the same thing is important for these agencies, because they are essentially, not only can they help businesses set up their entire web stack, but it's important for their own business to offer more services to these end businesses. Like these agencies can now say, hey, I'm not just offering services at the build stage, but I'm going to help you once your site is built to make it actually drive business results over time, to convert better, to bring in more revenue, etc. That lifts all boats, right? Like helps those businesses, helps like agencies have more tools in their tool belt, things that they can sell, more services that they can sell themselves. And it helps us because it like lifts the value of the platform, because now we have a lot of people advocating for us through the like this partner base, through customer testimonials, etc. The tough part that's really, really hard in our case is like pricing and packaging. How do you actually, when you have like huge companies that have a lot more complexity and have higher needs, but like 90% of product overlap is largely the same. How do you get more kind of smaller businesses and freelancers in the door, while also making sure that we're fairly pricing for the things that like these businesses are paying sometimes 10 times more, if not 20 times more, with like more sophisticated platforms like the digital experience platforms like the Adobe experience managers of the world, etc., where it's already a huge cost savings to them and they see amazing value there, but it's like significantly more expensive than what you might see on our pricing page, for a typical freelancer, etc., or a startup that's like two people. That's where the complexity lies, but we're consistently figuring out that piece to make sure it like fits for everyone. But the overall, like, it's a daily, if not hourly, conversation around like what actually serves the needs of both of those constituents, like businesses and partners, to ultimately create much more, engaging, rich, on brand performing websites and run them, much better than what their previous solution was, or where they don't have to like involve a bunch of engineers to get their ideas out to market, etc. But it's not a solved problem. I think it's like, like right after this, I have another roadmap conversation. Sometimes they're like super deep and tactical into like a specific feature, and sometimes they're very long range to try to figure out thematically where the product is going, etc.
That makes a ton of sense. I mean, I guess from the perspective of like this growth flywheel, there's freelancers and agency owners have very similar needs, but maybe more collaboration
Yep.
type thing. And then you've got, enterprise partners which need more security, etc.
Yep.
But I think what's really fascinating for me as like a single Pringle, a solo freelancer.
Single Pringle.
Single Pringle is another one. I don't think I don't use that. Like that's not, I don't even know if that's like a commonly English
Sounds like you have
phrase.
a chip on your shoulder about that term.
Yeah, maybe master of the friend zone.
Yeah, let's crack on.
Yes. I think though this idea that Webflow is definitely not leaving behind freelancers, and it's more like they're expanding the nature of what a core customer is, like market wise, to enterprise customers.
Yes.
But I've heard you talk about this idea really eloquently, that just because there
Wait,
are
you've heard me speak eloquently?
Yeah,
That's new for me.
I know. There was one interview.
Okay, send me that recording. I must have been out of it.
But can you tell me that idea a little bit, for anyone that's listening and is like a freelancer and they're seeing a lot of enterprise features that Webflow are bringing in, and they're a bit worried about that. Can you tell me about that?
Well, I think it's not either or. We see more. So freelancers, the entire journey of becoming a partner, the ideal state, maybe it's not the ideal state for everyone. Some people want to stay individual freelancers for a long time, but we see a lot of success from agencies going from a single freelancer to becoming like a 5-person agency to like a 30-person agency, because they're building their book of business, they're like serving larger and larger clients and have a very diverse set of clients. So our entire goal is to help, not only, it's kind of like a flywheel again, where we want to attract larger companies, not just for like pure business reasons, but because it gives so many smaller companies and smaller agencies the confidence that this platform works at scale, right? They have something, like if companies much further ahead than they are is able to get all of their needs met by our platform, then you don't need to worry about like graduating off, or like the platform will be there even as you expand your business. And I think internally we think the same way about our partner base, in that we want to empower our partners and agencies to start expanding their business to like greater and greater heights. And that usually means working with fewer but more, I don't know if this is the word that comes to mind, lucrative, but I don't know if that's the exact word, but like kind of like how I mentioned the kind of client I had, where it's a client that really values the work and can pay you a ton for your time, that you actually spend less time on that one client and make more than you might spend on 5 other clients. So we want to empower freelancers and agencies to be able to like level up over time to like scale their own business and serve larger and larger customers. That doesn't mean that you do that exclusively, but in order to do that, we have to make sure that collaboration functionality, that scale functionality, security functionality, the controls and auditing, all the things that you need more and more as your team scales, that is also part of the platform. And like I mentioned, it's really tough to figure out like pricing and packaging here, but our entire goal is to start bringing down more and more of these. It's really hard to get like these larger businesses to pay significantly more when all you're getting is the features that are like listed on the website that everyone else is getting for like 20, 30, 40 bucks or whatever. And you need that differentiation in order to like have an enterprise offering. But as we have strengthened that, and as it become like more and more complete, you're now seeing us do a lot more things like single site access, for example, becoming available to agencies and enterprise customers, right? Where we know how important that is for agencies to work with their clients. So you're getting something that previously only enterprise customers got, because we see how valuable it is for folks who are essentially building their own book of business. And we see it as valuable for us too, because it helps these partners bring in more clients and manage more clients and stick with our platform and build more sites, and have more confidence that the platform will be able to scale as their freelancership or their agency grows, and it has its own level of higher scale. So it's complicated, But I think it's something where we absolutely rely on the strength of our partner base. And without our partners, without this community, without so many freelancers and agencies building their own business around Webflow, a lot of what we're doing wouldn't work. So we are deeply invested into making sure that all these, from like an initial freelancer that's just trying to make it, with their first few clients, which I know is super, super tough. I've been there. Like I've done that for years where, it's like you're not making a living wage sometimes. You're kind of scratching and clawing to get, your first client, or convince your next client, or your first client to give a testimonial to get your next client, etc. We want to make sure that partners of all sizes can succeed.
Beautiful. It's important to hear, because I think a lot of people that listen to the podcast, they were like, ask Vlad about enterprise and what the vision of Webflow is. And I think it's important that regardless of, all the different feature updates and no doubt there's all sorts of things that are coming down the line with Webflow.
Think of it as like
approaching.
A lot of times people have said like we're shifting to enterprise. I've really just thought about it as opening up the umbrella to larger companies, right? And so much of that is important to smaller companies because, in the past we had so many people graduate off the platform because as they hit a certain stage, they're like, Webflow doesn't meet our needs at the next stage. So I've really seen this as a way to expand our focus, to make sure that once you are on Webflow, we have all the functionality you need. And we're still, I can say with a straight face, we're pretty terrible for, like Qantas.com, or some of the largest, like highest traffic websites to go run on us because they're just so sophisticated. The platform is just not ready yet, right? Those are like, 10,000 person companies, etc. We have Amazon as a customer, but they're building things like Amazon Care and all these other sort of like sub brands that are smaller properties, not Amazon.com. So I'm not going to pretend like Webflow can stretch into like all use cases, but it felt really important because the vast majority of businesses are in this like small, medium, and like corporate segments, which is, up to like 2,000 employees. And we want to make sure that when companies are at like 50 employees or 100 employees, they can see ahead and say, Webflow's still going to serve my needs when my company grows. And as a partner, as an agency, as a freelancer, you have confidence saying, I can go pitch these larger companies. Or as the companies I already serve grow, they're not going to, like the platform that I put my, my word behind, my career behind, my agency behind, is going to scale with meeting the needs of my clients, even as they grow. Some clients never grow, right? They're like a dentist office that, just keeps operating forever. They don't have like more employees over time. It's just kind of stable. But a lot of freelancers and agencies have clients that continue to grow, and you want to make sure as an agency you can say with confidence, I'm going to be here by your side to help guide how you can grow your web presence and make it more performant, and help it grow your own business by, partnering with you and Webflow to make that, whatever your dreams are, a reality.
Yeah, definitely. So, Vlad, we're coming to the end of the interview now. Are you ready for your most difficult question so far?
Ooh.
If you think you've had some hard questions, you ready?
I mean, I kind of have to be.
What is your next failure going to be?
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's not a secret. So Webflow has this awesome sabbatical program. Every 5 years, you get 5 weeks off. And, I took my last sabbatical 5 years ago when the pandemic was getting started. And this sabbatical, which is happening this summer, I'm going to be learning how to surf with my youngest daughter for part of it. And I am expecting a lot of failures there. So I'll answer that way. I've never surfed except for the web. And I'm like pretty terrified actually that it's going to be, like bail after bail and, getting stuck under the waves, etc. But it's actually weirdly kind of a set of failures that I'm looking forward to. And I don't know if it's going to lead to like a lifelong kind of surfing hobby. I hope it does, in that it's another thing I can do with my daughters. But I'm pretty sure it's going to feel like a failure for the first week or so.
That's epic. Well, I really hope that you have a good time. And of all the failures that we've spoken about today, that doesn't sound as terrifying as being CEO of a 650 odd person company as it scales. But I'm glad that you chose that one at the end. It definitely shows that you are a good dad, I would say.
Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for coming.
Shall we, on the surfing note, shall we wave goodbye?
Oh my God, we got to wrap this up. Casey behind the camera is cringing. But thank you for coming on Webflow and sharing as vulnerably as you have. It was
Of
epic.
course. It's my honor and my pleasure. Thanks for being here.